It's Phumlani Majosi, the author of Lessons from Power's Heroes. It's awesome to be back on the show as usual to tackle the most important political and economic matters. Joining me is Kallie Kriel. He is the CEO of AfriForum, the Chief Executive Officer of AfriForum. Kallie, how are you, sir? Are you holding up well?
Yes, good day to you, Phumlani. I'm holding up well, but it's a privilege for me to speak to you. I've been following you, what you say,
Yeah.
and I've learned a lot from you, so I'm glad to be on your show.
Wonderful, wonderful. No, it's great to talk, Kallie. I'm one of those citizens who are very much concerned about our country. I want it to succeed. I want us to do things the right way. And you also, you and I share, we share the same sentiment. Kallie, one of the what concerns me the most now, you as we kick off our conversation, crime in the country, the levels of crime, Kylie, the fact that we in South Africa, when you compare us to Ukraine, which is a war zone right now, there are more people dying here in South Africa than in Ukraine, right, where it's a war zone. It's We have serious levels of murder in the country, the state of criminality. At one point, this is a few years back, I learned that according to the World Bank, about 10% of our GDP, it's a cost to crime. Um, how do you see, for me, criminality at this point, Kylie, it's something that really turns me off. And I've noticed that even on my social media platforms, that what turns off people in the country are the levels of crime. So give me your thoughts on that and then share with me what concerns you the most in this country at this time.
Yes, thank you so much. I think crime is an issue number one.
Mm.
Next to, of course, the whole education issue, and I think
Yeah.
the two are related. But in terms of the research that we've done, in terms of South Africans that have left the country, the number one reason for people leaving the country is, of course, then crime. And
Mm.
also, we're asking people when will they come back. The number one issue is when the crime situation is solved, or at least softened in terms of the impact. So there is a brain drain in that regard. But I think it's more important than in terms of the economy is that people should be able to have a happy life in the country. You should be able to bring up your children in a safe environment.
Yeah.
And that applies to everybody. I think that's the one thing that we have in common is that most people, the vast majority, would want a good future for their children. And I think if people looks at the future, the one strong issue is the issue of crime. So the question is, what do we do about it? Because that's part of AfriForum's approach. You
Mm.
can complain, but it won't help in the end if you don't do something about it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think communities have a strong role to play. And we have in AfriForum, as part of our broad strategy, not only with regard to crime, but everything we take on is to say that communities must take their future into their own hands. And there, I mean, not only the Afrikaans community, that's mostly our constituency, all communities. And what we've seen with regard to crime, where communities say, well, we're going to take on this issue, you have a very, very big impact. We cannot necessarily change the resources that the police get directly. There are good policemen and women, but they are under-resourced. And then, of course, there are many policemen and women that are not equipped for the job. But communities can say, we will work with those policemen and women that want to make a difference, but we can do a number of things ourselves. In terms of neighborhood watches, AfriForum has 177 of them countrywide, with
Mm.
about just over 10,000 volunteers. But that you can do in all areas. In suburbs, but also in townships. We have cooperation with a number of communities that don't necessarily have the resources, but they have a human resource, people that can be the eyes and ears of a community. So in terms of crime, violent crime that affects communities, I think communities should play a bigger role. But then, of course, there are other forms of crime, corruption, and a number of other issues where we need a good functioning criminal justice system. And I think those are issues that we need to address. The criminal justice system is one of the biggest problems, the collapse of that. I've just the other day I spoke again to Advocate Kallie Kriel,
Mm.
and on all spheres we are seeing where victims are being left in the lurch by the system. A lack of capacity by the police to investigate, in terms of the prosecuting authority, a lack of resources, but also in terms of cadre deployment. You see that sometimes people are in positions. We've just seen the Gauteng national prosecutor being suspended
Yeah.
because he
Mm.
was willing to prosecute people with political connections. So it's weakened by the cadre deployment that we've seen there, and then the backlog in the courts. So there needs to be an overhaul of the criminal justice system. And while we are fighting on the one hand for that, communities must get involved themselves.
Mm. Is the government allowing communities to be involved and be because I like your concept, the idea that as
Yeah.
communities, you know, let's take charge, play a significant role in shaping our communities. But is the government allowing this to take place, or is the government constraining, suppressing, communities, disallowing them from playing a significant role, whether it's in crime, whether it's in education, whether it's in I don't know, sort of medicine and so on, all kinds of sectors. Is the government allowing us to do this, Kallie, or is it being an obstacle, a barricade?
No, they are an obstacle, and we
Yeah.
believe that government should see communities and civil society as a resource that
Mm.
they can utilize, even in their own interest, but in the interest of everybody in the country. But because we have the ideology that's driven by centralization from the ruling party, they want to be in control. Everything is centralized. And if you centralize all decision making to one central point, you're not really giving communities the ability to participate. But of course, then what we should say, even if government does not make it easy, even if national government does not want that, they can't say no to us if we don't ask them.
Mm.
Um, we will just say, well, what are we going to do? But there's one fortunate thing. One tends to think there's a huge problem in the country, and of course there is. But it looks bigger if you just look at the 10% ruling elite that's highly publicized in the media. That is what we see, and then you become despondent. But we must always remember below that 10% ruling elite, you have 90% of ordinary South Africans that simply want a future for their children. And if you start with self-sufficiency projects in Afrikaans, it's onsself, in isiXhosa, it's vukuzenzele, that is
Mm.
part of our culture. If you're just saying, let's start doing it ourselves, 90% of the people would want to cooperate in that regard.
Mm.
And then what you also see, even at the national level, if government does not want to cooperate, on a police station level, of course, not all. Some of these police stations are dysfunctional, but in many of them, you have a station commander, you have some police officials that want to make a difference. and it's also in their interest. So what we've seen, we've started focusing on drone technology.
Mm,
With night vision, we have our own training facility because you have to go through a lot of training to get a license to fly them. And our goal is at the moment we have just over 60 drones, which is not enough. We want every one of our neighborhood watches to have that. But what is great to see is that on grassroots level, the police realized that this is a resource that they can utilize. So in many operations, we are invited by the police to take part. And with night vision, with drones, we can give the person that is in charge of the operation, give them an overview or bigger view of what is happening. So even though we complain a lot about what is happening with regard to many issues in the country, and those are the things that, of course, get publicity. But below that activity of ours, 80% of our activity is focused on do it ourselves,
mm.
work with various communities on all spheres. And I think that's where the future lies. So there is a good future for us, not because of government, but despite them.
Just sorry, despite them. Now let's talk about. Because I mean, I started with crime, and it's one of the things, and then there are various things as well in the country, including immigration problems, in education as well, the dismal educational outcomes. That's a very serious concern. You could also we could be honest about the dismal economic growth levels in the country. How we've been over the past 10 years. We grew at an average of less than 1%. I mean, I've been having a few economists here on this show, Kallie, to really try to make sense of our economic situation. So how do we, in your view, at macro level, right? What are the key things? You are not an economist. You are CEO of AfriForum, but you do watch the most important things that we could do to sort of improve the state of our country. You've touched on communities playing a role, but some people will ask a, a simple question: what should the government do? What should our government do, right, specifically, in order for South Africa to be, to get better?
Yes, you're right, of course. I'm not an economist, so that's why I'm thankful for people like you that know more about the issue. But what I
Mm,
can speak about is the experience, my personal experience, as well as the experience of AfriForum.
mm,
I'm actually a teacher. That's what I studied for, and I was a high school teacher for a number of years.
mm.
So from that perspective, and what I've learned there, if I had a magic wand and I can change one thing in the country, it would be rehabilitating our education system or fixing
Education,
our
yeah, fixing our
education
education
system.
system, yeah.
Because I think in terms of the economy, you would know that human resources are the most important, is the most important resource that any country needs to
Mm,
be successful. And if you look at the dismal state of our education, one can look at the matric results and see, well, we've got a pass rate of 80% or whatever it is. But the real issue is that nearly half of the children that go into grade 1 never get to grade 12. They fall out of the schooling system. So if you look at the matric pass rate, it's only a pass rate for half of the children. So the real pass rate is much less. And
mm,
because there's a drive just for this window dressing, every year, for instance, the Free State fares the best. But if you look at what happens, there's the biggest fallout rate, especially from grade 11 to grade 12.
mm,
So you have, unfortunately, just to look good, children are rather kept back or pushed out of the schooling system just to get a better result. And what we've also see is in terms of inequalities in the country, one can say, how should we solve inequalities?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of plans and affirmative action plans, but the best way to solve inequalities is to fix the education system. Because
Yeah.
when 80% of our schools are dysfunctional, as it is at the moment, it means 80% of the children don't get quality education. They come into the economy, and it's not really an unemployment problem. It's a skills mismatch problem, because
Mm.
if you have people that are not employable in the modern economy, then of course you're going to have huge unemployment. You're going to have huge you're going to have huge poverty levels in the country. So if one says, what should government do? What should be the first process? The problem that we see in the 80% dysfunctional schools is a discipline problem. And
Mm.
there you have a trade union like SATU, the South African Democratic Teachers Union, that has a big say in what is happening at those schools, and people are being protected. They don't pitch up for school. So in terms of making sure that government brings back discipline, in terms of making sure that teachers are in front of the classrooms, that is specifically the one issue that needs to be addressed. The
Mm.
second issue is the issue of mother tongue education. And,
Yeah.
and that is something we need to promote, because the one mistake that people make is, of course, it is good to be able to work in English because the economy has become an English economy.
Mm.
But it does not mean if you are taught in your mother tongue that you won't be able to function in the English economy. The fact is, we see many people, when we see the mismatch, the skills mismatch, is that maths and science, especially those two subjects, are people are not have not mastered those subjects. It then leads to a negative effect in terms of what skills they get. And what we know is to master maths and science, if you get taught in your mother tongue, you master that, then you can apply it in another language. And we see the results, the worldwide results, where every year our children in the country write the test that is written by grade fours. And we see that understanding of reading and in terms of maths, we do very badly
Very
in terms
badly.
of
Yeah.
those tests. So the question is, are we not a clever people? That can never be.
Mm.
Our human resource has the same potential as anywhere else in the world. But if you're going to take children that have had very little exposure to English, and in a rural community, for instance, they're going in the first 3 years. They fortunately have mother tongue education. In grade four, they now have to go to school in English, and then you want to test their maths and reading ability. It's not, you don't test their maths ability, you're testing their language proficiency.
Mm.
But of course, that is something that where parents should play a role to put pressure on government to make sure that mother tongue education is broadened. At the moment, it's for Afrikaans speaking people and English speaking first language people have mother tongue education. And that is, they will then have the benefit. My children had the benefit of being taught in Afrikaans
Mm.
and to master these subjects. So they will be able to function well in the new economy. So we need to get the discipline. We need to promote mother tongue education. And I think if we do that, a lot of the other problems that we will speak on in the program will be solved, or we will be halfway there, because many of the other plans will never succeed if we don't have the right human resources in
The
the
right
country
human
to
resources.
address these issues. And
Mm,
that is, of course, also why AfriForum fights hard for also Afrikaans to exist as a language of tuition.
yeah.
But of course, we should protect that, but then make sure that we also work with parents to make sure that they understand the value of mother tongue education.
Yeah, yeah. No, what we are saying is it's backed by research in terms of the mother tongue education effects. So research supports your comments. And also just one thing to tell you. So last summer, back in KwaZulu Natal, I had lunch with my old high school teacher. He taught me in high school. He taught me isiZulu, and he was a language man. He was known for teaching Zulu at my high school back then. And we spoke about this. And he said to me, he was saying, well, Phumlani, I mean, you come from this environment. Here you are. Here's what you've done. At least in his view, he thinks I've done well. And then here now we began to speak about what is the challenge in education, that we are not producing this sort of competitive young people, at least at an academic level. And she said to me, one of the, and this is overlooked a lot, he said, and he said, the language itself, Phumlani, the fact that people are taught many of very sophisticated subjects in English, that itself is a barrier, right? He was saying the mother tongue, teaching is effective in contrast to when people are not learning in their in their mother tongue. So he was supporting your assertion that part of the problem, what hinders people when it comes to educational progress, is the language itself, right? The fact that people have to pursue education at the language that is not their mother tongue. So I thought he had a good point. He had a good point, and he made a few examples back when he was a child, as to how Zulu was used a lot to teach young people, and in his view, that he thought that had changed compared to today, where really English is being pushed very hard on young people, and they don't speak it as their as their mother tongue. So I thought he had a very, very good point. But so your point is it's spot on. And now I want to move to Ramaphosa. And how do you see Ramaphosa as the president, in your view? And then we'll come to the government of national unity. But how do you see him has been? Because my judgment of him, Kallie, has been that I think he's really out of depth. He doesn't understand what the role of the government should be in terms of organizing our society. He doesn't understand the complexities of the economy. What you need in order to create prosperity or to advance people. He believes in this redistribution sort of worldview, that when we have a certain group of people who seem to have more, we should take from them and give to those who don't have much, at least in his view. And he has failed in terms of, when you look at the macroeconomic numbers in his first term, it was dismal. He didn't do well at all. In the GNU here, I don't think he's doing well. He has collapsed our relations with the United States. He must be held, I believe, accountable for that. But how do you see him as a leader? I've been disappointed.
Well, I think that is an understatement. He's a huge disappointment, if
Yeah,
I
a
can
huge
say it that
disappointment.
way. Yes, and I think how much it has changed. I remember also amongst AfriForum members when we did research, when he came into office, replacing former President Zuma, people were upbeat because they said, now here's a chance for a new beginning, to take on corruption, to get rid of irresponsible policies. And looking back, that has not happened. And I think there is a huge disappointment, not only amongst the AfriForum's members, but I sense that in a broader community in the country, there's a huge disappointment. What is also frustrating for me is in terms of how the president portrays himself. People sometimes think he's the moderate. He's being pushed by these radical elements in his party that holds him hostage. There might be elements of truth in that, but I think the president himself is a real problem in the sense that it is not Panyaza Lesufi or Paul Mashatile that signed the Expropriation Act. It's President Ramaphosa that signed that act. And that act was actually, if one remembers, after it became known, that was when the US's the Truth Social post of President Trump came to the fore directly after that. So that was one of the huge issues that puts our country's economy at risk. We've seen what happens, of course, in Zimbabwe and Venezuela. And to just have the word expropriation with no compensation in an act in itself is putting the whole economy at risk. And we must remember it's President Ramaphosa that signed this. Also, with regard to the Bella Act, it was President Ramaphosa that signed this. Many of the other issues that we are seeing, the very harsh race regulations that have been published now, has been published under the leadership of President Ramaphosa. So I think people should see what it is because, in a sense, it was much easier to oppose irresponsible policies from former President Zuma because everybody could see there was a real problem in terms of corruption. It's now much harder because there's this facade of a reasonable person that's not radical, and that makes it harder to approach. But I think people are starting to see the things that have gone wrong. In terms of our international policy, the escalation of South Africa's anti-Western policy and alienating some of our trade partners was done under the leadership of President Ramaphosa, not under the leadership of Paul Mashatile or anybody else. So in that sense, we must realize there's a real problem, but not become despondent to say, if there's a problem, what can we do about it ourselves?
Yeah, yeah. No, it's been a disaster. I think even when we look at, I was looking at the numbers the other day. We spoke about crime in the first segment of our conversation. The homicide rate when it came in February 2018, it was about 35 per 100,000 people. It rose during his first term, the homicide rate. This was intentional killing to about 45 per 100,000 people. That is just a shocker. You know, poorer countries in Africa don't have these levels of violent crime. You know, Kallie, I don't buy the view that, or the opinion that for us to drastically reduce this sky-high murder rate in our country, we would need to grow the economy at plus minus 5%, or reduce the unemployment rate to less than 10%. Because those are people who argue that, well, we should fix the economy first before we can reduce these high levels of violent crime. I'm saying no. We can reduce the high levels of violent crime with effective law and order, right? With communities, as you were suggesting earlier, with a functioning police justice system. President Nayib Bukele in El Salvador, he took over a country backwards, I think it was 2018. He took over a country that was run by gangs, right? El Salvador, one of the deadliest countries in the world in terms of violent crime. And he turned things around. In 2-3 years, the murder rate was down by half. You know why? Because you said, I am going to take criminals head on. The gangs cannot run the country. I don't have to wait for the economy to be XYZ for me to be able to tackle to reduce violent crime with effective law and order, with a serious policing. collaboration between the police and communities, creating that culture of collaboration, I think we can drastically reduce these high levels of violent crime. That is just my view. Or my opinion. And what are your thoughts in the 7 minutes we have? Tell me about this government of national unity, Kallie. We are more than a year in now. Well, it's July now. Last month it was a year into this government of national unity. Um, my honest view is that even though the markets uh, they do like this GNU, but in terms of policy direction, I think we're in the wrong direction. And I think that the markets, these guys who are doing the trading in various, kinds of financial markets in the country, at some point they will wake up and say that, look, actually we are being scammed here with this GNU. But how do you see this GNU? I think it's in the wrong direction in terms of policy.
Yes, like the president, I think it's also a huge disappointment. But I think the biggest achievement of the government of national unity is that its composition, what is it not composed of? And I think people are positive simply because it's not an EFF MK driven government. And then people
Mm,
say, well, this is much better than what we could have had. But I think we should not be mediocre in that. We would say, what should we have achieved? And what we've seen, unfortunately, is that the ANC has turned the GNU into actually an ANC-led government.
mm,
Because look at the policy directions, our foreign policy has not changed. It's still the ANC's foreign policy. If you look at our latest racial criteria or regulations that has been published, it is
mm,
ANC policy. If you look at the signing of the Expropriation Act, it is ANC policy. If you look at the signing of the Bella Act, it is ANC policy. So you just see the continuation of ANC policy. And
mm,
then you have some patches where we see a difference. We might be able to get a passport quicker, and there might be better agricultural policies,
mm,
but the real issues are not being addressed. And it's a catch-22. I think the other parties, the ANC knows that these parties are desperate to keep MK and the EFF out, and they are abusing the situation by just the continuation of their own policies. So that is a disappointment. Um, but I say again, if one says, what is the future of the country, and you're just going to look at government to build that future for us, these kind of things, the disappointment of the government of national unity would make one very despondent with regard to what should be happening. But there's a lot that we as citizens can do. Of course, government can make it quite hard for us. But, if you look at rural communities, the poverty levels, government does not have the resources, they don't have the right policies, and they don't have the political will to uplift poor communities, especially in rural communities. But it does not mean nothing can be done about that. For instance, AfriForum has a number of cooperation agreements with a number of communities, the Barolong Buseleka community in the Free State, the Amabele community in the Eastern Cape, and a large number of others. And what you have there is people in those communities. For instance, in the Barolong Buseleka, it's Kgosigabo Moroka that says, I want to uplift my community. Government is not going to assist me. What can I do? And there's agricultural projects that we are involved with, and a number of other economic activities that are started. So in terms of poverty issues, we've already spoken about safety issues. but just also in terms of service delivery in a community. Of course, we don't have the resources to provide the services that government cannot, but at least in our areas where we stay, we can make sure that we clean up the place. We can make sure that we fix potholes in those areas. So there's a lot that we can do to make sure that we provide the circumstances where we want our children to grow up. And I just needed to also say that because I've got a lot to say about how disappointing the president is and how disappointing the GNU is. But what is not disappointing is the ability of communities in this country to say we have certain values. And if you look at family values and the respect for the elderly, all those kind of values are part of the heart of all communities in this
All
country. And
communities,
we need to foster that and say, and of course, we must be vigilant, put pressure on government where they fail. But in terms of AfriForum, we've took a decision a number of years ago, and it doesn't look like that, but we said we're going to spend 20% of our resources in what we call our watchdog part of AfriForum. Of course, that 20% gets the most publicity. But 80% of our resources we put into local communities. And South Africa would have a future if we just realize we've got hands, we've got brains, we can do things for ourselves and get away from a dependency attitude.
And mentality,
So those are the things that I think we can do, which gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Wonderful. Kallie, wonderful to talk to you, sir. Great to have a nice, very nice conversation with you. It's an honor to talk to you. It's Phumlani Majozi. This is the Phumlani Majozi Show. Kallie, hopefully you will join us again soon.
Yes, thank you, Phumlani. And I've used up all my English now, so I'm glad you're in the show. No, I'm just joking.
We'll find a way of making the next recording in Afrikaans.
No.
Which will give me a lot of homework to do and then to improve my Afrikaans.
No, thank you so much. It was an honor speaking to you.
Fantastic. Phumlani Majozi. We'll chat soon.